which are just far too high, then this is perfectly compatible with incentive and growth. You have lots of people who are happy to head companies, although they make only 10 or 20 or 30 times more than average income. The view that you need to make 100 more times than average income or 200 average income in order to accept working as the head of the company, and that if you make only 20 or 30 average wage, it's not worth it, you will not work. I think this is incredibly ideological. Of course, you want to have entrepreneurs, you want people to accumulate wealth, become rich through their innovation, but you want to have some mechanism in the tax system that makes sure that this concentration of wealth will not reproduce itself above a certain point.
Thomas Piketty proposes a global tax on the super-rich. This is surely not going to happen. But concern remains. Without strong intervention, a new hereditary class of ultra-wealthy capitalists will become more dominant in future. Joseph Stiglitz argues that such rising inequality is unsustainable.
The current model in which the disproportionate share of the gains go to the top and the people at the bottom not only don't share in the gains, they're actually worse off year after year. That's going to be economically, socially, politically unacceptable.
You might say it is unacceptable, but the remarkable thing is that if you were to have been asked 25 years ago, would it be possible for the share of the top 1% in income to go from about 10% to close to 25% in the US? I think those are roughly the numbers. And there would be no real political backlash. You would probably have said, that doesn't sound very plausible, but it's actually what's happened. So why can we be at all optimistic that if we could do something, we actually will?
Well, in the United States, I share with you a certain degree of pessimism because the rules of the game in politics are as distorted as the rules of the game in economics. We have a democracy where money speaks loudly, so much so that I describe the situation as closer to $1 one vote than one person one vote. In much of Europe, that has not yet happened. And for Europe, I hold out greater hope because I do think that citizens will say that's not the kind of society that they want to live in.
So how should our societies respond? Diane Coyle offers a possible answer.
I think the campaigning organisations are definitely ahead of governments in responding to these changes. And if governments don't respond, if formal politics doesn't respond, then the informal politics is going to do it. And so far, it hasn't been all that effective and sustainable on a large scale. Occupy Wall Street and that movement had a fantastic short-term impact, but it didn't have the organisational structures and investment that turn it into an effective social force. But one day it will, if conventional politics doesn't step into it. More at the local level, actually, there are some quite effective campaigning organisations that are starting to try to develop new institutional structures to help people navigate this incredibly complicated and rather scary, uncertain world. And in a way, there's a parallel with Victorian times, I think, when institutions like mutual societies and learned societies and trade unions all developed as informal collective responses to the equally dramatic technological and political changes that were happening at that time.
We don't seem to be as good as the Victorians at creating new institutions.
I agree. It's very puzzling when you look back and consider the confidence the Victorians had in their ability to shape their future and build structures and institutions that would last for 100 years and more. And we find it hard to concentrate on the next day or 5 years. It's just rather shaming by comparison.
So where will these changes take us? Views differ. Tyler Cowen, author of Average is Over, offers a mixed perspective on what lies ahead.
A thinning out of the middle class I see as leading to more political disengagement and disillusion, and people taking refuge in a lot of ideologies which don't necessarily make sense but promise them a kind of free lunch. Unlike a lot of commentators, I'm not convinced this has to be unstable or lead to some kind of strange revolution. I think you see political instability more often in countries with a rising middle class with high expectations, which are then frustrated. And that doesn't describe either of our countries right now or looking forward.
Well, some people would argue that actually what is going to happen is happening in the short to medium run and will become worse in the longer run, is that humanity, as it were, will become redundant. The vast majority of human beings will have skills and abilities which are really worthless in this new economy, and it will be, far from being a utopia, it will be a dystopia.
I view that as a transition problem and one that will be with us for a long time, but not a permanent problem. So think back to the Industrial Revolution, which comes in the late 18th century. A lot of workers are displaced, and it actually takes many decades before they're reallocated in a way where most of them are earning strongly rising wages. Eventually it does happen, and I think the same thing will be true for this new Industrial Revolution. Keep in mind, humans have unique skills. I don't think those are going away. Machines will not be good managers anytime soon. Their creativity is still limited. So I think what will happen is, say 50 years out, the good stuff will be so cheap that the amount of capital you will need to own to really be a fairly wealthy person will be quite limited, and these gains will spread to the population quite widely.
And what do you think in that world will most human beings actually be doing?
Human beings will do what they want to do in this new world. So let's say machines can fairly cheaply produce 80 or 90% of what we're producing now, which maybe is plausible, say 40 years out, without much assistance from human labor. That means we automatically have this huge pile of wealth. Distribution is a very real problem. But again, the more productive are those machines, the more they're able to displace labor. Actually, the less redistribution we will need to do to ensure that a large number of people are benefiting from that productivity. So working class incomes are probably going to stagnate at a fairly high level. There'll likely be peace, there'll be more social tolerance, there'll be a lot more free goods like Facebook and Google, a lot of creativity and opportunities. So I don't view this necessarily as an unhappy time. I think it in many ways will be a quite remarkable and extraordinary time, with some amount of frustration, a lot of disillusionment, but it may well be the happiest period our two countries have ever seen.
Tyler Cowen's view that this may be the happiest period the US and UK have ever seen seems remarkably rosy. One point is clear: it will be necessary to learn and relearn skills as life proceeds. Will modern-day educators be fast enough and flexible enough to respond to the rapidly changing needs of their students? Frey from Oxford again.
It's not at all clear to me why computer programming and statistical modeling is not taught already in school, while many of these online education platforms are not being leveraged throughout our educational system. Why a lot of back-office work that teachers are sitting on is not being automated. And it's not at all clear to me why teachers are not spending more of the time doing interactive work with students. Because right now our educational system is very much based on teaching children how to store and process information, tasks that computers are actually better at. And what we need to make sure is that it doesn't end there. Teachers need to work with children and get them to interact, hopefully in creative and social ways, to teach the skills that we need for the future.
Doesn't it suggest that actually now the famous Luddites of the early 19th century were actually right, that the advance of progress is actually threatening us all with something close to general misery?
I'm not sure that's true. I think that's overstating it a bit. I still think we have the possibility to do something about this, first of all. I mean, the amount of labor is clearly not fixed. That's an illusion. But it also requires us to adapt to perhaps an even faster pace of technological progress in the future, and that poses challenges. But challenges can be overcome.
From his perch in Chicago, Robert Gordon isn't cheerful about what the next generation must look forward to.
Well, the present is bad enough, so I'm not going to predict that the future will be worse. Surely there will be a recovery, and if the economy does grow at 3% instead of 2% over the next few years, we'll begin to make up some of the lost income. My prediction is roughly for 1% a year per capita income growth in the future compared to 2% over the last 100 years, and the 1% then from that, you deduct for the growing inequality that most people will not see that 1%. They'll see something substantially less.
The future really isn't what it used to be. What we can expect for the future, for the vast majority of our citizens is very, very much worse than what they would have expected for their future 40, 50 years ago.
Oh, even 20 years ago. The growth rate of the U.S. economy per person up until 2007 was sufficient to roughly double the standard of living every 30, 35 years, roughly every generation. And this group of young people coming out of college today, the people in their 20s, are the first generation where it is reasonable to predict that for many or even most of them, they will not wind up as well off as their parents. And as a result, young people are having distorted choices of careers. They're delaying marriage. They're delaying childbirth. This in turn reduces the rate of population growth. And I might point out that, as every European knows, the consequences of low population growth are a growing dependency ratio, more old people that have to be supported by a smaller group of working people. Think of what that means for the burden on the working people to support all the old people.
Aging societies, suffering low growth, rising inequality, and big technological upheavals, it sounds a frightening combination. The challenge is to do the best we can to build a world where the opportunities and the benefits are more broadly shared. Back to the authors of The Second Machine Age, Andrew Mcafee and Erik Brynjolfsson.
If technology were affecting everyone in the workforce equally, there'd be, I believe, a much stronger sense of we're all in this together and we're all dealing with it together. As it is, some of what's going on, I believe, is that it's easy to foster an us versus them or a, Google is impoverishing us kind of attitude toward what's going on, which I think is inaccurate and very unhelpful, but is really taking shape. The population of geeks, which to me is a term of praise, the population of geeks around the world who are working in artificial intelligence and robotics and autonomous vehicles and all of these fields, they are going to continue to plow ahead with their work and turn out things that are going to astonish us.
We run into people who are pessimists and say, look, we're going to run out of jobs. Technology is going to cause growing inequality. We run into techno-optimists who say, hey, don't worry, it's always worked out in the past. We're in good shape. Just chill and it'll all work out. We disagree with both of them. We call ourselves mindful optimists. We think that there's no inevitable future, that technology is not going to do one thing or the other to us. It's what we decide to do with the technology. Just as in the past, just as in the first machine age, we have to actively think about how we want to use these technologies. With the right policy levers, with the right interventions by entrepreneurs and private business, with the right individual efforts that we all put in, we can shape this world into a very optimistic, positive one, but it's not going to happen automatically. We need to change the conversation and think about these issues and decide what our values are, how we want to shape this future economy. There's no single inevitable future. We have more choice now than we ever have had in history, and it's up to us to exploit that choice in a way that plays to the values that we want to see played out.
Are these unmanageable trends? Surely not. But redressing inequality and creating job opportunities for this and future generations will require intelligence and courage. These aren't challenges we in the advanced countries expected, but we will have to deal with them. One point is already clear. Even if we don't fully understand why, the future is indeed not what it used to be.
That was Martin Wolf. The producer was Sandra Canthal. Coming up in just a moment, we continue our Book of the Week, Eleanor Marks, A Life After This.
Should law embody certain moral judgments and promote them, or is the purpose of law simply to prevent people from doing harm to other people?
Professor Michael Sandel heads to the Netherlands, a country with liberal laws on cannabis, euthanasia and prostitution.
I'm pretty sure that every parent that have daughters or maybe even sons, they don't say, oh, I hope she grows out to be a prostitute, or that's every girl's dream somehow.
A new series of The Public Philosopher begins on BBC Radio 4